It was a quiet afternoon in a small neighborhood where life moved slowly, and people mostly kept to themselves. The sun was warm, filtering through the trees that lined the streets, and children's laughter drifted faintly from a nearby park. She walked along the sidewalk carrying a few grocery bags, humming softly to herself, enjoying the calm of the day. Her life was simple, predictable, and she liked it that way. But little did she know that today, something would happen that would change her life and the life of someone else forever. As she turned the corner near an old, slightly worn house, she noticed movement through the half-open window. A small figure crouched on the floor, shivering despite the warmth of the day. The child's eyes were wide with fear, darting toward every sound. There were bruises on the arms and small scratches on the face, marks that made her stomach twist. She stopped immediately, her heart pounding, unsure what she had just seen. She approached carefully, not wanting to scare the child. She crouched down and spoke softly. "Hello, are you okay? Do you need help?" The child flinched and looked away, whispering something that she couldn't understand. But the tone, the tremor in the voice was enough. She could feel the fear, the loneliness, and the silent cry for someone to notice. For a moment she hesitated. She knew that stepping in could bring trouble. Neighbors might gossip, authorities might take the child away in ways that could be harsh, and she herself had responsibilities she couldn't ignore. Yet as she looked at the small, fragile figure, she felt a pull she couldn't resist. She knelt closer, keeping her voice calm and steady. "I'm not here to hurt you. I just want to help. You don't have to be afraid." The child's eyes met hers briefly, a flicker of hope hiding beneath the fear. She noticed the small hands clutching the hem of a torn shirt, trembling. She reached out slowly, showing her empty palms, a gesture of trust. "It's okay. You're safe now," she whispered. The child took a small step backward, but the fear began to loosen, just slightly. Over the next few minutes, she learned that the child's name wasn't important to share yet. What mattered was getting the child out of the immediate danger. She gently suggested they go outside to sit in the sun, to breathe freely for a moment, and offered a snack she had in her bag. At first the child refused, shrinking back, but hunger and curiosity slowly won over fear. As the child nibbled on the snack, she realized how thin and fragile the child looked. This was no ordinary neglect. She could see the deep layers of sadness hidden behind the young eyes. She made a careful plan in her mind. She couldn't force the child to leave, but she could make small steps, small gestures of safety. Over the next few hours, she visited the house a few times, talking to the child from a distance, offering water, and slowly building trust. She never pressured, never shouted, and never demanded. Each day the child grew braver, moving closer to her presence, listening to her gentle words. One afternoon she brought a blanket and sat on the steps of the small yard. "You can come sit with me if you want," she said softly. The child hesitated but eventually crept forward, wrapping the blanket tightly around small shoulders. She offered her hand, and after a long pause, the child placed tiny fingers on hers. That touch was the first real connection, the first sign that the child believed someone cared. She realized then that this was not just about rescuing a child physically. It was about giving hope, teaching that kindness existed, and showing that trust could be returned. It wasn't easy. There were days when the child would run back inside, refusing to speak or eat, shivering with fear at the slightest noise. But she remained patient, never scolding, never giving up. Her own life became intertwined with the child's slowly, like two threads being woven into one pattern of care. She also began to notice the small, painful signs of the child's past. Broken toys hidden in corners, old wounds that left marks not just on the skin but in the spirit, a fear of loud voices, even hesitation at someone walking too close. Each detail was a reminder that the child had endured more than any child should. But she did not dwell on the sadness alone. Instead, she celebrated small victories. The day the child laughed for the first time, the day the child ate an entire meal, the day the child allowed her to braid the hair gently without flinching. Neighbors began to notice her visits and offered mixed reactions. Some whispered and frowned, questioning why she was getting involved, but she ignored them. Others, quietly observing, admired her dedication but didn't dare speak aloud. She didn't act for recognition. She acted because she could not turn away. As days turned into weeks, she worked quietly behind the scenes to ensure the child's safety. She spoke with local authorities, carefully explaining her concerns without exaggeration, and found a social worker who was patient and understanding. The process was slow and frustrating. Forms, meetings, and inspections took time, and there were moments when she felt defeated. But each time she returned to the child, she reminded herself why she was there. Every smile, every tiny display of trust was a victory worth fighting for. There were nights when she couldn't sleep, thinking about the child lying alone in that small room, wondering what tomorrow might bring. She imagined what it would be like if no one intervened, and the thought pushed her to continue. She stocked her home with small treats, new clothes, and books she thought might bring comfort. She prepared a corner in her own house, a safe and quiet place where the child could rest if needed. The child began to rely on her in subtle ways, asking small questions, showing favorite toys, or leaning against her shoulder for comfort. She noticed that the child's eyes, once full of fear, now held glimpses of curiosity. The child would sometimes ask about the world outside, about the trees, the sun, or the people walking past. Each question was a window opening to trust, and she answered with gentle honesty, careful not to frighten or overwhelm. The turning point came one rainy afternoon. The child had hidden under a thin blanket, trembling from fear when she arrived. She knelt beside the child and simply said, "You don't have to be afraid anymore. You can stay with me if you want. I promise to keep you safe." There was silence. Then a small voice whispered, "Okay." That word, so simple, carried the weight of fear being lifted and hope being accepted. She held the child close, letting the rain fall around them, knowing this was the first real step toward healing. After that day, the child slowly began to open up. They played simple games, read picture books, and shared meals that were always warm and filling. Laughter started to return in small doses. She never rushed, never demanded affection, but simply provided a steady presence. And that steady presence was exactly what the child needed. She also worked on building a routine, school attendance, medical checkups, and gentle therapy sessions. Each step was a challenge. Sometimes the child resisted. Sometimes the past memories surged like a storm, but she remained unwavering. She celebrated every small success, knowing that healing was not a straight path but a journey of tiny repeated victories. Through all of this, she learned as much as she taught. She discovered the depth of human resilience, the power of patience, and the importance of small acts of courage. She learned that saving a life was not always dramatic or heroic in the traditional sense. It could be as simple as showing up every day, offering a smile, and saying, "I'm here. You are not alone." By the end of those first weeks, the child's eyes no longer darted with fear at every sound. There were moments of playfulness, curiosity, and even mischief. And though the scars, both seen and unseen, would take longer to fade, the foundation had been laid. She knew that trust once broken could take years to rebuild, but the first seeds were planted. That afternoon, as the sun dipped low and the sky turned soft shades of pink and orange, she sat on the porch with the child beside her. They watched the world quietly, no words necessary, sharing a peace that neither had known before. She thought about how one small act of noticing, a small act of courage, had changed the course of both their lives. And deep in her heart, she understood that this was only the beginning of a journey that would test, teach, and ultimately transform them both. And so, in that quiet neighborhood, a bond began to form, one born from compassion, courage, and the simple but profound belief that every child deserves to feel safe, loved, and seen. Little did she know, years later, this bond would return to her in ways she could never have imagined. The days turned into weeks, and the weeks slowly became months. The small child, once so fearful and withdrawn, was starting to show signs of life and curiosity. There were still moments of hesitation, moments when the past seemed to creep in and pull the child back into fear. But she never gave up. Every day she offered a steady presence, a gentle hand, and words filled with care. She understood that trust was not built in a single day, and patience was the only path forward. They spent mornings reading together. She would pick simple storybooks filled with pictures of animals, trees, and faraway places. Sometimes the child would be hesitant at first, frowning at the pictures or trying to hide behind the blanket, but she would patiently sit beside, letting the child take the lead. "Which page do you want to see?" she would ask softly. Slowly, the child began. Emotions that had once been trapped inside. The woman admired these moments, offering encouragement without pressure, allowing the child to explore and grow naturally. There were still pointing, sometimes choosing the pictures with excitement, sometimes with shy curiosity. Each choice was a small victory, a sign that the child was beginning to feel safe enough to engage. Meals became another important part of their routine. The child had always eaten poorly, partly from neglect and partly from fear. She made sure that food was always warm, nourishing, and inviting. She encouraged small portions at first, never forcing, never scolding. Over time, the child started eating more, enjoying the textures and tastes, learning to associate food with safety and care rather than fear. There were moments when the child would hide a favorite snack to save for later, and she would smile quietly, knowing it was another small step in learning to trust the world. School was a challenge at first. The child had missed months of learning and social interaction. The first day she walked the child to the classroom, her stomach churned with worry. Would the child be bullied? Would the teachers understand the trauma? But she held the child's hand firmly, whispering encouragement. "You are brave. I am here with you. You can do this." The child clung to her hand tightly but slowly as the days went by. She learned to sit at her desk, raise her hand, and even share a smile with a classmate. At home, their afternoons were filled with quiet activities. Sometimes they drew together, sometimes they played small games, and sometimes they simply sat in silence, sharing a calm moment. She noticed that the child had a small sense of humor, often giggling at tiny, unexpected things. A bird outside the window, a shadow on the wall, a funny noise from the kitchen. She laughed with the child, creating memories that were safe and happy, moments that would slowly outweigh the fear that had dominated the child's early life. One rainy day, the child refused to leave the blanket and sat curled in a ball on the sofa. She sat beside, offering comfort without words. "You don't have to move if you don't want to," she said softly, brushing a strand of hair from the child's face. Hours passed, and finally the child lifted her head, eyes glistening, and whispered, I want to read." She smiled gently, handing over a book with bright pictures. For the first time, the child was choosing to engage with the world, taking a step forward on her own. She also understood that emotional healing required more than simple routines. She arranged for therapy sessions, carefully choosing a counselor experienced in working with children who had experienced trauma. At first, the child resisted, hiding in the corner or refusing to speak. But the counselor was patient, and so was she. Slowly, the child began to open up, sharing small memories of the past, tiny feelings of sadness, anger, or fear. She never forced the child to speak, but she was always there afterward, offering comfort and reassurance. There were small breakthroughs that filled her heart with hope. The day the child offered her a handmade drawing was one such moment. It was rough and simple, but it had been created with care, and the child's shy smile made it precious. "I made this for you," the child said softly. She held the drawing close, feeling the depth of trust and affection that had developed over months of patience. It was moments like these that reminded her why she could never turn away, why she had to continue no matter the challenges. Outside, the neighborhood was slowly noticing the change as well. Some neighbors were skeptical, watching from behind curtains, whispering questions. Others admired her dedication quietly but did not approach. Yet she didn't care about recognition. Her focus was entirely on the child, on creating a world where the child could finally feel safe. She learned to ignore the gossip and focus on the small, meaningful victories, the child's laughter, a hug, a new word learned, a fear overcome. One sunny afternoon, they took a walk through the small park nearby. The child, hesitant at first, slowly began to explore, touching flowers, chasing butterflies, and laughing at the wind rustling the leaves. She held the child's hand but allowed moments of freedom, letting the child explore with growing confidence. It was a turning point. She saw the child's curiosity outweighing fear, a sign that healing was slowly taking root. Evenings were often the quietest moments, when the child would sit close and share thoughts about the day. Sometimes it was as simple as, "I liked the swing today," or "the bird was funny." She listened carefully, asking gentle questions, never judging or pushing. These moments were crucial, creating a safe space for the child to express feelings, fears, and joys, learning that emotions were not dangerous but something to be shared and understood. Challenges remained, of course. Some nights were sleepless, filled with nightmares and trembling. Some mornings were difficult, with tears and refusal to face the day. She met each challenge with calm and determination, holding the child close, whispering comfort and reminding her that she was safe. She realized that progress was not linear, Healing was messy, unpredictable, but every effort mattered. As time went by, she began to see changes in the child that went beyond the physical or immediate emotional healing. The child began to speak up more, share ideas, and express preferences. The timid glance became a steady look, the hesitant voice grew stronger, and the small gestures of trust multiplied. She knew that the foundation being built was solid, and the child was starting to regain not only confidence but a sense of identity. She also encouraged small social interactions outside the home. A friend from school, a neighbor child, or a park encounter became opportunities for the child to practice trust in the wider world. The child's initial hesitation gradually gave way to smiles, laughter, and even playful teasing. It was a slow process, but each moment of connection reinforced the lessons of care, kindness, and trust. There were days when she herself felt exhausted. The emotional weight, the constant vigilance, the slow pace of change, it could be overwhelming. But she reminded herself why she started this journey. Each small victory, each moment of trust was a reminder that her efforts were not in vain. She kept a quiet journal, noting milestones, fears overcome, and joyful moments, as a way to track the child's progress and her own growth in patience and understanding. The child began to show talents and interests as well. Drawing, music, curiosity about the world around her. These interests became avenues for growth and confidence. She encouraged the child to pursue these small joys, attending music classes together, exploring nature, or simply sketching on paper. Every moment of engagement, every spark of creativity, was a sign that the child was reclaiming a sense of normalcy and joy. By the end of that year, the child was no longer the small, frightened figure huddled in the corner. She walked with a little more confidence, spoke in sentences that showed thought and understanding, and even smiled without hesitation. The scars of the past were still there, visible and invisible, but the child was learning that the world could be safe, that people could be kind, and that love and care were not just fleeting illusions. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, she reflected quietly on the months that had passed. She realized how much courage the child had shown, how much resilience existed in that small body and mind. She also realized how much she had learned about patience, the human spirit, and the power of simple, consistent acts of love. She understood that this was only the beginning. There would be challenges ahead, but the bond they had built was strong enough to carry them through. And so, life settled into a new rhythm. Days filled with learning, laughter, small victories, and careful attention to healing. The child's life, once shadowed by fear, was slowly filling with light, hope, and possibility. And she, the woman who had stepped in without hesitation, continued to walk beside the child, guiding, protecting, and nurturing. The journey was far from over, but the path had been set, and every step forward was a triumph of courage, kindness, and unwavering care. Years passed, and life continued its quiet rhythm. The small child, once so fragile and frightened, was no longer a child in the same way. She had grown taller, stronger, and more confident. The woman who had rescued her watched with quiet pride as the child transformed, not just in body but in spirit. Every step forward was a victory, every smile a proof of the resilience that had been nurtured carefully over the years. School became a place of growth and exploration. The child, now a young teenager, attended classes with increasing ease, no longer shrinking from the world but facing it with determination. She still had moments of hesitation, moments when past memories surfaced unexpectedly, but she had learned tools to cope. The woman remained a steady presence, helping with homework, encouraging participation in group activities, and celebrating every success, no matter how small. Friends slowly entered the child's life. At first, the child hesitated to trust anyone beyond the woman, fearing betrayal or disappointment. But through gentle encouragement, patience, and countless afternoons of social practice, she began forming bonds. There were sleepovers, shared secrets, and laughter echoing down hallways. Each friendship became another layer of confidence, teaching that relationships could be safe, joyful, and rewarding. The young teenager discovered talents that the woman helped nurture. Drawing, writing, and curiosity about the world around her became outlets for self-expression. She would spend hours sketching, the pencil moving across the page as if capturing all the hard days. Bad memories would sometimes return like shadows, unexpected and unwelcome. A raised voice at school, A disagreement with a friend or even a smell that reminded her of the past could trigger anxiety. But by now she had learned to express her fears, to breathe through panic and to lean on the woman for comfort. The woman never judged, never scolded, only listened, held, and guided. Over time, the child learned that fear could exist without controlling life. The neighborhood, which had once whispered and watched, began to see the child differently. She walked with confidence. Her laughter carried across streets, and neighbors began to notice her intelligence, kindness, and resilience. The woman had not sought recognition, but quietly both she and the child became examples of how care and patience could change a life. Education became a focus as the child matured. Homework turned into projects, exams, and school competitions. The woman helped without taking over, encouraging independence while offering guidance. She celebrated every good grade and supported her through disappointments. The young teenager began dreaming about the future, not just surviving but thriving. She thought about careers, places to study, and ways to contribute positively to the world. And she dreamed bigger than she ever could have before the woman's kindness had entered her life. One summer afternoon, the young teenager shared a goal she had kept hidden for months. "I want to help kids like me," she said quietly, almost afraid to say it aloud. The woman felt her chest swell with pride. She realized that her efforts were coming full circle. The child she had rescued now wanted to make the world safer and kinder for others. It was a moment that confirmed everything she had done. The long days, the quiet patience, the countless small gestures of love. There were times when life tested them. Teenagers are not easy to guide, and she occasionally clashed with the woman over rules, school, or personal choices. But even in disagreements, the foundation of trust and respect remained. They could speak openly, air frustrations, and return to calm understanding without fear of judgment. These moments became lessons in resilience, patience, and empathy, preparing the young teenager for life outside the protective bubble the woman had created. Holidays became more meaningful. Birthdays, celebrations, and simple weekend outings were occasions to reinforce joy and connection. The child learned traditions, small rituals of happiness, and the importance of creating positive memories. For the woman, these moments were bittersweet, a reminder of the pain the child had endured before, and a celebration of the life that was now unfolding. They would laugh, take walks, bake, and even sometimes argue over silly things, each moment shaping a stronger bond. The young teenager also began to understand the value of gratitude. She would often ask questions about the woman's life, her struggles, and her reasons for helping. Through these conversations, she began to see that kindness was a choice, often made quietly and without expectation. She admired this strength and began internalizing it, learning that compassion and courage were inseparable in creating a life worth living. There were also moments of reflection for the woman. Watching the child grow, she realized how much she herself had changed. Patience had deepened, empathy had grown, and the capacity to love unconditionally had expanded. Saving the child was not just about protection. It had reshaped her own understanding of what it meant to live fully, to give freely, and to value the strength of human connection. One winter evening, they sat by a small fire in the living room, the wind howling outside. The young teenager shared her dreams aloud for the first time. "I want to finish school, help people, and maybe even travel," she said. Her eyes shone with hope, and the woman could see that the past pain no longer defined her. The child she had rescued had become a young adult capable of imagining, planning, and believing in a better future. The young teenager began taking steps toward independence. Part-time jobs, volunteer work, and community projects became part of her life. The woman offered guidance, helping her balance responsibilities while ensuring she didn't take on too much too quickly. The child learned discipline, accountability, and the satisfaction of achievement. Every small success reinforced the lessons of care, patience, and resilience that had been taught over the years. There were friendships outside the neighborhood that brought new experiences, new challenges, and new joys. The young teenager learned to navigate these relationships with wisdom and care, sometimes making mistakes but always learning from them. The woman observed quietly, stepping in only when necessary, trusting the foundation they had built to carry her through. The young teenager's relationship with the woman remained central. They shared meals, stories, and quiet evenings. They discussed dreams, fears, and life's uncertainties. These conversations became a safe space for exploration and self-discovery, reinforcing the bond that had begun in fear and uncertainty years ago. The woman knew that one day the child would step into the world fully, but she also knew that the values instilled, kindness, patience, and courage, would guide her wherever she went. Graduation approached, a symbol of growth and achievement. The young teenager stood taller, more confident than ever, prepared to take the next step in life. The woman attended quietly, filled with pride, remembering the first day she had found the small, frightened child and seeing the strong young adult before her now. It was a culmination of years of patience, care, and unwavering love. As the ceremony ended and the applause faded, the young teenager hugged the woman tightly. "Thank you for everything," she whispered. The woman held back tears, feeling the depth of the bond that had carried them both through countless challenges. She understood that this was not an ending but a new chapter. A chapter where the child she had rescued could now face the world with strength, hope, and the lessons of a lifetime of care. Even after graduation, the young adult maintained contact, visiting often, seeking advice, and sharing successes and struggles. Their relationship had evolved from dependence to mutual respect and love. The woman saw clearly that her efforts had not only shaped a single life, but had planted the seeds of compassion, resilience, and purpose that would grow far beyond what she could imagine. And as the years continued to pass, she knew that this journey, the journey of rescue, healing, and growth, was a testament to the power of human kindness. The child who had once been lost in fear and pain was now a young adult capable of love, understanding, and hope. And all of it had begun with a single act of courage, a willingness to step in when no one else would, and a commitment to nurture a life that had been at the brink of despair. The woman often reflected quietly on those early days, remembering the fear in the child's eyes, the trembling hands, and the small victories that seemed so insignificant at the time. Now, years later, she could see how every small gesture, every moment of patience had added up to a life transformed. She realized that her role had always been more than protection. It had been guidance, support, and the creation of a safe space where hope could grow. The young adult now had dreams beyond the neighborhood, ambitions that reached far and wide, and a sense of purpose rooted in empathy and resilience. The woman had given her the tools to face the world, to trust herself, and to believe in kindness, and she watched with quiet pride as these lessons began to take flight. And so, the bond between them remained strong, a testament to what could happen when someone refuses to turn away from fear, pain, or uncertainty. The years of care, patience, and love had shaped a life that was no longer defined by the past, but by hope, strength, and the power of human connection. It was a journey neither would ever forget, a journey that had begun with courage, sustained by patience, and blossomed into a life full of possibility and promise. Years had passed since the young adult had grown and stepped confidently into the world. The woman, now a little older, moved through her days with a quiet rhythm. She still helped others in her neighborhood, offered advice to friends, and contributed to her community in small ways. But there was a sense of calm that had settled over her life. She often thought about the young adult she had rescued years ago, smiling at the memories of small victories, shy smiles, and first steps toward trust. Her home had grown quiet during the day. Work and community responsibilities filled her hours, but there were moments when she paused to remember the journey, the months of patient care, the long walks, the evenings spent reading stories, and the countless times she had held the child close during tears or fear. She understood that these memories were precious, a testament to the power of small, consistent acts of kindness. Even though the child had grown and moved on, she maintained a subtle connection. Letters, occasional phone calls, and short visits kept the bond alive. The young adult shared accomplishments, struggles, and new dreams, and each update filled her heart with pride. She never sought praise or reward. The satisfaction of knowing she had made a difference was enough. The young adult had grown into someone capable of self-reliance, kindness, and hope, and that was the most profound reward she could imagine. She spent mornings tending to her garden, the small plot of flowers and vegetables reflecting the care and attention she had put into many aspects of her life. Just as she had nurtured the young adult, she nurtured plants, seeing in them the value of patience, time, and consistent effort. Each bloom reminded her that growth, whether in people or life, required dedication and faith, and that small efforts could lead to beautiful outcomes. Neighborhood life moved on. Children played, neighbors worked, and the seasons changed quietly. Occasionally, she would hear whispers about the young adult, friends from school or community members mentioning how well she was doing, how she had excelled in her studies, or how she had volunteered to help others. Each story brought warmth to her heart, a reminder that the seeds she had planted were bearing fruit far beyond what she could have imagined. Even with life moving forward, she sometimes felt the emptiness left by the child's independence. Those quiet moments in the evenings, when the house was still and she had time to herself, reminded her of how intense and consuming the earlier years had been. She missed the daily interactions, the laughter, the stories, and even the small arguments. But she also knew that these were signs of success. The child had grown strong enough to live independently, to face the world, and to carry forward the lessons she had learned. She continued helping children in her community whenever she could. It wasn't always dramatic or heroic. Sometimes it was as simple as listening, offering advice, or bringing food to a family in need. She had learned over the years that impact didn't always come in grand gestures. Often, the quiet acts of kindness were the ones that mattered most. She saw herself in those children, remembering the fear, the uncertainty, and the need for guidance. Her reflections often turned to gratitude for the opportunity to make a difference, for the strength she had discovered within herself, and for the resilience of the young adults she had helped. She understood that life had a way of testing people, of presenting challenges that could feel overwhelming. But she also knew that courage, patience, and unwavering care could transform even the darkest circumstances. One evening, she found herself walking past the park where she had spent so many afternoons with the child long ago. The memories were vivid, the laughter, the shy glances, the small hands holding hers. She smiled quietly to herself, realizing how much the child had grown, how far she had come, and how deeply their lives were intertwined. Even if the child was no longer physically present every day, the bond they shared remained unbroken, a quiet but powerful connection. As months turned into years, she noticed subtle signs that the young adult might one day return in a more meaningful way. A letter here, a message there, hints of visits and shared updates created anticipation. She didn't know exactly when or how it would happen, but she sensed that the child, now a young adult, would come back not out of necessity, but out of gratitude and the desire to show that the lessons of kindness, patience, and trust had left a lasting impact. She continued her life with quiet dignity, focusing on small routines that brought fulfillment. Morning walks, tending to the garden, helping neighbors, and reading books were all part of her days. Yet underneath the calm there was an awareness, a hope, that the young adult would eventually return, not because she needed her, but because human connections often circle back in ways that are unexpected and meaningful. Sometimes, she reflected on the challenges she had faced in those early years, the fear of failure, the worry that her efforts might not be enough, and the exhaustion from constantly being vigilant. But she realized that every moment of doubt had been worthwhile. The child had grown into a compassionate, capable, and resilient young adult, a living testament to what courage and care could accomplish. Her community had grown to respect her quietly. They saw her as someone who helped without seeking reward, who cared deeply, and who had the strength to make a difference even when others looked away. Children in the neighborhood began to seek her guidance, not just because she offered help, but because they trusted her sincerity, her patience, and her unwavering belief in human goodness. One late afternoon, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold, she sat on her porch reflecting on her journey. She thought about the child she had rescued, now living independently, pursuing dreams, and making a positive impact. She thought about her own growth, the lessons she had learned, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing she had played a role in shaping a life. She realized that her actions, small as they sometimes seemed, had rippled outward in ways she might never fully see. As the seasons changed, she continued her routine but remained alert to the possibility of the young adult returning. She didn't dwell on it obsessively. Rather, she allowed herself to be ready when the moment came. She knew that true gratitude and connection often arrived quietly, in moments of sincerity and depth, and she trusted that their bond would endure. The woman found joy in simple things, watching birds at her feeder, sharing tea with neighbors, helping children with homework, and tending to her flowers. Each day she was reminded that life's value was not in grandeur or recognition, but in the small, consistent efforts that made the world better for someone else. She also spent time reflecting on the importance of human kindness. She understood that life could be harsh and unpredictable, and that some people, especially children, could face circumstances beyond their control. But she also knew that a single act of compassion, offered without hesitation, could change the course of a life. The young adult she had rescued was living proof of that truth. Occasionally, she allowed herself to imagine the moment when the young adult might return fully into her life. She pictured the door opening, the young adult standing there, and the exchange of gratitude that had been building quietly over the years. These imaginings brought warmth and anticipation, a quiet hope that her efforts would eventually be acknowledged in a way that reflected the depth of their bond. Even as time passed, she never stopped believing in the power of human connection. She continued helping others, offering guidance and creating spaces of safety and care in her community. She understood that life's challenges were ongoing, but so too were opportunities to make a difference. Each act of kindness, no matter how small, was part of a larger pattern that shaped lives in ways visible and invisible. She also remained humble, never expecting reward or recognition. Her satisfaction came from the knowledge that she had made a lasting impact, that someone who had been lost in fear and pain was now living a life filled with hope, strength, and purpose. The lessons she had imparted, courage, patience, and compassion, had become deeply ingrained in the young adult, ensuring that her efforts would continue to ripple outward for years to come. And so, life continued quietly with small joys, meaningful work, and the steady flow of days. She had grown older, wiser, and more reflective. Yet she remained ready for the moment when the young adult would return fully, bringing with her the acknowledgement and gratitude that had been quietly building over the years. She understood that this return would not be the culmination of her efforts, but rather a continuation of the journey, a journey of human connection, love, and the enduring power of compassion. In the evenings, as she watched the sun set and the shadows lengthened across her yard, she often whispered a quiet prayer of gratitude for the life she had lived, the difference she had made, and the young adult whose life had been forever changed. She knew that the story was not yet complete, and that the next chapter would bring its own joys, surprises, and lessons. But she also knew that the foundation had been laid, that love and care had created a bond that could never be broken, and that human kindness, once offered sincerely, always returns in ways beyond expectation. And so, she lived with hope, patience, and quiet anticipation. Every day was meaningful, every act of care significant, and every moment a reminder that even the smallest gesture of compassion could shape a life. The young adult who had once been lost in fear would one day return. And when that moment came, the woman would be ready to witness the fruits of years of love, guidance, and unwavering support. Years had passed quietly in the neighborhood, and life had settled into a calm rhythm for the woman. She continued her days tending to her garden, helping neighbors, and quietly contributing to her community. Even though the young adult she had once rescued had grown independent and started living her own life, the woman often thought about her. She remembered the first day she had found the frightened child, the days of patient care, the small victories, and the laughter that had gradually returned. She smiled quietly, thinking about how far the child had come. One late afternoon, as the sun was beginning to dip low and paint the sky in soft oranges and pinks, there was a knock at her front door. It was not an ordinary knock. There was a sense of purpose behind it. She paused, a small flutter of anticipation running through her. Could it be? She had often imagined this moment, but now that it was happening, her heart beat faster.